Good day to all. I'm Thomas Neeson. I'm Managing Partner at Cundall. I'm just here to welcome you to our webinar, which today is on our journey to carbon neutral and beyond. Today I've assembled a panel of 4 speakers, 3 experts and me. They'll do most of the talking. They've got so much to tell you. But as Johnny might have said as you're coming in through the door, this session will be recorded. So you'll be able to watch it in your own time and ask questions as we go along with the Q&A section. We've asked to put 4 people to talk here today for fairly specific reasons. I'm here to tell you about why we're doing this, why it's important to us as a business. Then Lee and Madeline will take you on to how we're doing it. Lee is a structural engineer and will take you through the process of how we account for our carbon and what we've done to reduce it. Madeline's an architect by background and a specialist in sustainability and economics of sustainability, and will take us through then how we offset those elements that we cannot reduce. And then we'll follow on with Simon, who heads our sustainability teams, and Simon will take us through the process of, once you've got to carbon neutral, what do you do next? What do we do next as a business, and how do we help others along the path? I can see from our attendee list, there are some people who may not be too familiar with Cundall. Say we're an engineering consultancy. We've been going 45 years next year. We started off with about 12 people. We've grown that to 950 around the world in 21 offices. Obviously, most people are working from home right at the moment. Apart from our colleagues in Asia, who are all back full-time in their offices, even in Melbourne. Although I think just yesterday, Adelaide are probably out. I think it's a 6-day lockdown in Adelaide. So circumstances change all over the world with COVID, but we carry on and we find ways to communicate and educate and help you come along and share with us so we can all learn together. You've just jumped over to, Johnny, if you go back, 2 significant things on the previous slide. One is when we became a one planet company. That was when we really started to audit our impact and set some real targets as to how we impact on the environment, on the world we live in. And the second one is becoming a carbon neutral consultancy. We achieved that in September, just gone. Lee will take you through the path we were on to get there a year ago and over the past year, and show how we might be able to do that for others. Thank you. As I say, we're based across the globe, from Ireland to Australia and lots of points in between. And looking at the attendee list this morning, those that have joined, I can see people that I know from all across all those territories. So welcome here today. Hopefully you can learn something. Hopefully we can share knowledge and the Q&A at the end so that we can all educate each other and help. We win awards, big deal, some might say, but the good thing about doing that is it challenges us to be constantly pushing the boundaries, constantly helping in thought leadership in the industry, helping to set the standards, helping to set some of the legislation, in fact, and drive the agenda, particularly in sustainability. And it's something that we're proud to do and very committed to. And quickly, for those that may not know us, we offer our skills across all engineering disciplines and services, and climate impact, global warming affects all of these areas of business, and there's something we can bring to bear across all of these areas. And similarly, in our sectors, no sector is without impact on the environment and climate, and we have bespoke solutions and bespoke approaches in all of these sectors to how do we minimize the impact, be it in the formation of education buildings. There's a big push there to look at modern methods of construction, looking at green infrastructure and master planning, looking at the growing world of data and how do you minimize the impact and the energy consumption of all the data services that everyone requires, delivering better healthcare buildings, delivering to the WELL standard. Simon will talk about that later. Lots and lots of opportunity to positively impact on our planet. Our journey started when our business started. You won't be able to read this timeline, but with some significant milestones along the way. We're proud to have done the second low energy hospital in the UK in the early 1980s, and we've carried on since that. Jeff Cundall, our founder, was president of the Lighting Society, and he was developing low energy lighting and pushing the boundaries, right from commencement of starting Cundall. Significant timelines on here: 2012, when we got accredited as the first one planet consultancy by a regional. We set targets that Lee and Simon will come on to talk about, so we could start measuring what our impacts were, so we could reduce them, right through until setting up our sustainability roadmap, where we set our targets, and Lee will talk about that further, and through to getting accredited as zero carbon in the current year. And the timeline will continue, and we'll continue to push and do more to drive this agenda. We framed it all in our sustainability roadmap, which we've talked about previously. We set that in 2017, set some measurable targets, and set what we see as our cornerstones. Obviously, today is mainly about us and our workplace and how we've become zero carbon. We realize our biggest impact is on our projects, how we shape the future across the 1,000+ projects that we do every year. That's where we can really make a difference, but also we can take it back to our homes and our communities, and at the other end in industry leadership, help to do the research, help to drive the agenda, help to set the targets that can make the world a better place to live in. And as Simon says, we need to be doing lots if we're ever going to get to limiting the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. So we can't take our foot off the pedal on the journey there. So hope you enjoy the presentation with our speakers. I'm going to hand you over now to Lee. He'll take you through how we go about measuring, understanding the impact we have, and then what we can do to reduce that. So thank you, and over to Lee.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. So I'm just going to give a quick overview about our journey, really moving, redefining our strategies on sustainability, and then we'll move more into the zero carbon achievements we've recently done. So I'm going to jump on to the next one, Johnny. So as Thomas has outlined, our commitment to sustainability goes back over many years. It's underpinned by the company's mission, vision and values, which hold sustainability very much at the heart. But you can't become complacent about your existing strategies, and these need to be reviewed on a regular basis and refreshed to make sure they remain relevant and stretch you to achieve the most you can. In response to this, in 2017, we undertook a materiality review to ensure our strategies remain aligned with our areas of greatest impact. This was led by an Aspire group, future leaders, if you like, within our business, and they brought a unique insight because they weren't involved in the original roadmap and aren't sustainability consultants, so they're really good at challenging us. As part of that, it's important to engage very broadly. As you can see on the left-hand side, we undertook surveys with our staff, engaged with industry bodies such as World Green Building Council, and bioregional, took surveys with our customers, and then looked on the other side at market trends and where opportunities arise. So there's an awful lot of data search and gathering through there, and external peer review as well. So we engaged again with Green Building Council, the likes of Jonathan Porritt and a few others, to really challenge and stretch us, because you can become blinkered by your own perceptions on things. Okay, John, if you want to jump down. Having worked with bioregional since 2012 on the One Planet Living journey, a lot of our strategy has been underpinned by the 10 One Planet Living principles on the left-hand side there. But in 2015, the UN Sustainable Development Goals were released, and whilst there's a lot of overlap, there's a few new things that come out of there. So we wanted to merge these together to make sure we took a very holistic review, and then augmented that with some of our own expertise and general knowledge of future opportunities. So creating a really broad base of where we started from. If we jump on to the next one, what the problem you have then is this gives you an awful lot of things to consider, and if you consider too many things, you end up doing everything pretty poorly. So it's important for us to prioritize those. So a large focus on the materiality review is about understanding where we can have the greatest impact and those elements that have the greatest significance, and focusing our efforts in those areas. We don't completely ignore the others. We carry on reporting on a number of these across One Planet Living and other things, but really concentrating our efforts where they deliver greatest benefit back to society. So the conclusion of that was to focus on 6 priority areas. We have zero carbon energy, health and well-being, ethics and equity, climate change adaptation, the materials and supply chain, and climate positive action. And we've done a number of webinars covering quite a few of these now, which are uploaded onto YouTube, our YouTube channel. So there's lots more there if you want to delve into any of those deeper at a future point. I think what became clear to us as well, or it was already clear to us, but going through the process, it reinforced that whilst our business operations are important, they're quite small in relation to the impact we have through the projects on which we work. So there's a large focus on how we embed sustainability at the core of all our disciplines. Within the process as well, I think it's important that we set clearly defined targets, and that these targets are well aligned with the skills that we have and the impacts that we can achieve. So all of this was captured in our sustainability roadmap at conclusion of the materiality review. This sets a 5-year framework of what we want to achieve, and then below that we have defined action plans under each of the areas. And these are spread across the 4 cornerstones, as Thomas outlined, so our projects, our officers, our communities, and industry thought leadership. There's a number of key targets in there. I guess noteworthy for today is becoming a carbon neutral business by 2020, and Simon will move on to the future pathway to becoming a carbon positive business by 2025. There's other things as well, like climate change adaptation, which we've been doing extensive research on, and again, we're committed to sharing our knowledge and moving the whole industry forward, so they're posted on our website. I won't go through this in detail, but it's important to set yourselves measurable targets. It's very easy in this to set aspirational things that you can't really track, but be realistic on things that you can monitor, make sure you're on track, and be open to adapting and adjusting your plans as you go forward to make sure that you do continue on the right trajectory to achieve your goals. Okay, Johnny, come to jump down. I think the other thing as well, a plan is great, but without buy-in from all parties, you'll never get it to deliver. And we'll come part way in that, as I say, through the materiality review, we'd engaged extensively across the business. But we felt that it was important to have a strong governance which underpin that as we move into the next phases. So we created a sustainability committee, which you can see at the top there, which reports directly into the management board. It's formed from a broad cross-section of our business, and it focuses on the areas in the next row down. So focusing on our 6 impact areas, focusing on a number of initiatives, which we'll come on to in a second as enablers and culture changes. And then the important part of our business is the SUS team. So each location has a group of representatives from the office who look at collation of understanding sustainable data from that location, energy performance and those things, and also how they can stretch things in their communities and the performance of their premises. There's a lot on reporting, which Madeline will pick up on more, and then communications, and it's important both internally and externally to share that knowledge. Drop down to the next one. So I say this is also a big cultural change management piece as well. So we thought long and hard about how we did that and put a number of enablers in place across there. So all of our staff, whether they're existing and with all future incoming staff, go through a sustainability induction as well as their other inductions. And this goes through the roadmap of where we got to, what we see as our priorities, and importantly, how they can contribute to that, the channels for them to engage and feel part of that community. We've also embarked on a Cundall diploma. We got 20% of our staff through that in the first year, and that's continuing to roll forwards. And it's run over a year. There's 10 modules and gives people an oversight of a whole range of things, really, ranging from sustainable high-level overviews, drilling down into legislation in their relevant markets, sustainable master planning, air quality, all sorts of things within there. So it gives people, doesn't go too into detail, but it gives them enough to know what the opportunities are out there, and then they can reach out to the broader business. And then looking beyond there at our projects, we've got the Beyond report, which we now undertake on all our projects, and it's pinned around the 10 One Planet principles and looks at what opportunities there are to drive the project for sustainable good. And it goes beyond the disciplines we're involved in. It's something we do without charge on our projects, and really just try and stretch the knowledge and share some of our broader experiences. Okay, so if we go down to the next one, we'll now move on to climate positive action. And the journeys we've taken really over the past 12, 18 months or so to become a carbon neutral business. So Cundall first achieved carbon neutrality for our Australia offices back in 2019. You're always looking backwards, so that covered the 2017-18 reporting period. And in Australia, we made the decision to be certified by the Climate Active Scheme, who are very active in the local market there. As Thomas says, it's great. We've now moved forward from there, and we achieved carbon neutrality for the whole business back in September. And again, that was reflecting backwards. So that was on our 2018-2019 data. Independent certification is very important to us to verify that. And we work with the Carbon Trust on that because of their global reach and global recognition. And it's well aligned with that of our own business. But this is only the start of the journey. As I say, we're pushing on beyond there towards climate positive business as we go towards 2025. And in 2019, we had approval on our science-based targets, reduction targets. This is quite different, that you can't bring offsetting within there. So this is an absolute carbon reduction, emissions reduction, and as such is a far greater stretch goal really to achieve, but creates a great framework for how we're moving our focuses going forward. Okay, right, we'll move next one. Thank you. So just in terms of the process, really, it's a four-step process. The first one is understanding your footprint. So calculating what your carbon equivalent emissions are, taking account of your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. We'll come on more to what they are. And Simon will come on to the data thing as well in a few minutes, but there's a lot of data to get here. It's important that you start to concentrate on the integrity of data as early as you can. Having identified that, is then looking at how you can reduce your carbon footprint. So focusing on driving that down, the initiatives and decisions you can make in your business to bring that down as low as possible. And then the result of that is that you'll be left with some carbon footprint. Hopefully minimise that as much as you can. And then looking at how you can positively offset that and how you can offset that aligned with where your emissions occur, which Madeline's going to pick up on for us. And then there's a whole thing about reporting, disclosure, and due diligence around that, which follows beyond there in stage 4. Okay, so if we go down to scope 1, 2, and 3. So scope 1 is related to your direct emissions. So these are things that are owned or controlled by you, the reporting company. And these are things essentially, if you like, things that you burn. So carbon's a large proportion of this, but also we capture everything else. It's a greenhouse gas in there, so you can see the clouds floating around there. In Cundall's case, and in businesses like ours, is primarily related to things like office gas and company-owned vehicles. It also includes fugitive emissions, so that's emissions that emanate from refrigerants from your air conditioning systems and that sorts of things. And importantly, scope 1 is mandatory under the greenhouse gas protocol, so you need to report on that to achieve carbon neutrality. Scope 2 is indirect emissions, so things that you use but someone else burns for you, in essence. So in Cundall's case, this is primarily the electricity we use in our offices. And there's different ways of looking at this, which Simon will come on to. So there's market-based and there's location-based. And where we have integrity of the market, we've moved towards market-based, so we can bring on board trying to work with energy providers who have a strong chain of clarity on renewables and things as we go through there. Scope 2 is also mandatory under the greenhouse gas protocol, so definite reporter on that. Scope 3 gets a little bit more interesting. You can see how diverse it is by the number of circles that suddenly emerged on the diagram. But scope 3 is all indirect emissions that aren't in scope 2, so it's a broad net. And it includes both upstream and downstream emissions. You see your upstream coming from your left and downstream going towards the right. The upstream emissions are those associated with purchased goods and services, waste generated, your travel, things like that. And for a business such as ours, they're a very significant part of your overall footprint. Scope 3, so the downstream emissions are things that you provide to others. So less significant in our case, but for a number of businesses, they can be the largest part of their process. Unlike scope 1 and 2, scope 3 aren't mandatory. But as I say, they can be the largest part of your footprint. So if you're looking at the whole value chain of your footprint, it's really important to consider your scope 3 to gain a full understanding and make sure your efforts are focused in the right place. in driving down emission reduction. So this is an example for ours. This is data from the Carbon Trust reporting back into the 2018-19 period. And illustratively, you can see you've got your scope 1 on the top right and scope 2 on the top left, but you've got a great big area of oranges and things, which is all our business travel. And for a international business like ours, it's inevitable that business travel is significant. We've got offices and projects across the globe, and that comes with a carbon footprint. So you can see here the importance of considering that. At present, our scope 3 is primarily focused on business travel, and there's lots of things on scope 3 that we are starting to consider. I think one of the challenges for this is that we're very committed to local procurement, supporting local industries, working with ethical businesses, and that means we have a very diverse supply chain. So there's a lot of work to do on that, and again, Simon will pick up on some of this as we go through. Okay, Johnny, next one. So just picking up quickly on the approach and the journey with the Carbon Trust. It was a fairly quick journey. It took us around probably 8 to 10 weeks to go all the way through that. The first stage is the footprinting, and that's focused on collation and verification of your data. I think we're in a unique place really, because since 2012 we've been collating lots of data on our energy for the One Planet Living reporting, and that meant we had a lot of this already in place, and we had the SUS teams, as I say, who kind of championed that and assisted in local verification and understanding of the data, making sure that's consistent. We did find a few things that were missing in there, so we weren't capturing things like fugitive emissions and that, but the data is very important to you. Carbon Trust then look at verification of that process, so whoever you're working with on your verification, looking at your energy bills and everything else to make sure that what you're declaring is accurate. And then you move on to stage 2, where you then look at how you can reduce that. So looking at your roadmap for reduction of emissions, and then looking at your offsets, which I say Madeline will pick up on in a second. Okay, Johnny? But measuring data really isn't much use to anyone if you don't do anything about it. So it's thinking about how you can do that stage 2 aspect of driving that down. We've been doing things, as I say, since 2012. We won't go through the full list that you can see there, but we've had big focuses on investment on our IT systems to reduce the need for travel. We've been transitioning all our offices away from fossil fuels, and we've been looking at purchasing of renewable energy wherever that's possible. Transportation is clearly a big part of that, as we say, so also looking at sustainable forms of transport in our travel policies and all those sorts of things. When you go through the process, this all gets captured in a qualifying explanatory statement, which Madeline will pick up on again in just one second. Okay, so how have we been doing on the journey? This graph takes us back to 2012, and you can see the bars on the top side of the line are our emissions, and they break down by the scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 business travel, and you can see they're kind of sliding positively downwards. So there's been a really good reduction over that period. And then when you get to 2017-18, you can see there's a green emerging below the line. So this is where we started to offset with offsetting our Australian offices initially, and then as we go into 2018-19, offsetting the global business, so we reached neutrality at that point. There's some bumps as you go along the journey. You can see, for example, our scope 3 went up in 2017-18, and this is largely due to collation of more data, refining our processes of that. But we're now committed to the roadmap of taking that down, bringing that down as low as we can, and phasing out of our scope 1 and scope 2 as we go towards 2022, which again Simon will pick up on in just one second. And next one. So that kind of takes us through the process of collation of the data and then identifying a roadmap for reduction. And I'll pass over to Madeline now, who's going to pick up more on the process of offsetting, which is often quite a contentious one.
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, I will say a few words about offsetting and disclosure, as Lee just mentioned. This is a slide or a graph taken from the UK Green Building Council, slightly adapted, but it shows what type of offsets there are. So offset projects are mainly divided into 2 different types. One is reducing emissions in the first place, and the second one is removing emissions from the atmosphere. And then there's a further breakdown depending on whether carbon is stored or not, and whether it's stored long-term or short-term. And you can see on the bottom there are a few gray fields with long-lived storage. These are basically carbon capture solutions that are not really working now. So the projects that are left, and the offset projects you can invest in, are really avoided or reduced emissions without storage. That's mainly renewable energy projects or capturing methane gas from landfill sites, for example. Then the second one is short-lived storage. That's, for example, changing agricultural practices to retain carbon in the ground. And then probably the most popular ones are carbon removal with short-lived storage, which all the reforestation, afforestation, nature-based projects fall under. And we already touched on the Sustainable Development Goals, and they are also connected to carbon offset projects. So the whole carbon offsetting concept is based on the global community agreement, the Paris Agreement 2015, but also further back the Kyoto Protocol, where the United Nations and all countries in the world decided on doing something about climate change. And because this is triggered by United Nations, there obviously also is an interest in helping development and providing a better world for everyone besides the climate mitigation aspect. And that's why carbon offsetting projects are all coupled with other co-benefits. And these co-benefits can be, for example, employment for indigenous communities, providing fresh water, fresher air, also biodiversity, basically helping biodiversity to flourish. And a lot of the projects you can purchase are now directly connected to the Sustainable Development Goals, and will tell you how far they track against that. There are, in terms of credibility for carbon offsetting projects, there's a set of criteria to ensure that. These three criteria you see here, they basically come from quality assurance systems and accounting systems, so very similar to that. The first step is measuring and monitoring your carbon emissions. How much emissions does the project actually take out of the atmosphere or avoid over time? The second part is then an independent audit or third-party audit, and then also the transparent reporting. And you will see it's actually quite similar to the process involved into becoming carbon neutral. So then the offset project in themselves have also this process embedded. And there are some other criteria as well. For example, that the offsetting or the carbon removal is permanent, that the units are unique, and that there's no leakage, so that there's no more emissions elsewhere. The probably best verification schemes are the gold standard. And here in Australia, we also have our Australian carbon credit units, which also have very high credibility. This slide shows a summary of the criteria we put together to be able to select offset projects, because there are literally thousands of offset projects around the world. So the first line, the verification, that was something that was given by the Carbon Trust, because they also want to ensure that the standards of verifications are very high. So they require to certify or get offsets certified by the gold standard or by the UK Woodland Carbon Code. Then for project types and co-benefits and also locations, we split our requirements into scope 1 and 2 and scope 3. The reason for this is that both the Carbon Trust and PAS 2060, but also Climate Active here in Australia, they allow to buy offsets for all three scopes. But really, scope 1 and 2 should be neutralized by powering buildings and powering the economy with renewable energy. And scope 1, obviously, it's fuel swapping, so getting electric cars or swapping gas out of buildings. So there are different ways than having to buy offsets. We have bought obviously we have bought offsets for scope 1 and 2 now, because this is a transition period at the moment, and Simon will also talk a bit more about what we do about our 1 and 2 reduction. But for now, the criteria for scope 1 and 2 was that we do invest at least into renewable energy or energy efficiency projects or fuel swapping projects. And we also wanted to invest into least developed countries, basically countries that don't have any governmental subsidy schemes in place yet, to also help these economies to green and to grow with the green energy grid. For our scope 3 emissions, we wanted to tackle our land and nature impacts and also connect it to Sustainable Development Goal 14 and 15. And for us, it was important to also have offsets close to our office locations to ensure that there's a better due diligence process. So meaning we can basically go there and we can check how they work, but also to invest into our local communities and in our local areas where we operate. And then there was a few other criteria. One is the vintage year, so when was the carbon actually removed? Then we also looked into other co-benefits. For the fuel swapping projects, we looked into how much percentage is swapped. So if you have a cement plant that runs on coal power and they swap out a part of it with the renewable energy, then you may not want to invest into something that still runs 90% on coal. So that was something important for us to look at. And then also the price, because you can get offset projects for $1 US, which is way too cheap and is a bit controversial and questionable as well. So price plays a role, and Simon will also talk about this a bit more. And this is really the same slide again, just with hopefully our criteria then in 2025, which basically then has scope 1 and 2 emissions removed or offsets removed, because we have removed our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And so this is, it has a little 4 on the top there, or the headline. So this relates back to the process of carbon neutrality slide that Lee showed before. You may remember it had these 4 steps. So first was the carbon calculation. The second was the reducing of the footprint. The third was the offsetting. And now this is the last and 4th step. Reporting and disclosure. On that slide, you see our 2 public reports. The one on the left one is the qualifying explanatory statement. That's our report we published for the Carbon Trust. And on the right side, you see our public disclosure summary from Climate Active here in Australia. If you go with any other schemes for carbon neutrality, any credible scheme will always require a public report and public reporting, and they have the same content. So both reports outline what our footprint was, how we reduced the footprint, and then also how we offset and which offsets we purchased. And on that note, I will hand over to Simon, and Simon will tell you about our next steps.
Thanks, Madeleine. Good morning, all. So I'm going to take us through the next steps. As we've indicated, this is not the end of our journey. This is just one more step along the road on our climate emergency response. If you go down to the next slide. So looking at this trajectory and graph, it's very interesting, and it's been interesting for kind of the last 8 years, because a lot of these bumps in the graphs aren't always about reductions. The biggest challenge we face, and we face with clients when working on climate reduction strategies, is data gathering and collection. Scope 1 and 2 are fairly easy to collect because they're generally just based on bills, but they're still a challenge for most organisations. But the big challenge is scope 3 emissions and improving the quality of scope 3 emissions. I'm working with quite a lot of clients who are only just starting their journey at the moment, and we're having to estimate 80–90% of their scope 3 emissions. Because we've been doing this for 8 or 9 years, our accuracy of our scope 3 has improved significantly, but it's still not perfect, and we will continue over the next few years to try and improve the quality of that. One of the key ways we do that is with our procurement strategy. So trying to align all of our procurement and require it to report in a certain way, and that's across the globe. So getting all of our catering providers, our transport providers, all to provide the same data in the same format, so we can report it annually. And this is a huge challenge because most industries aren't geared up for it, but we are working with our supply chain to improve that data quality and ensure they're making reductions on their own business and operations. One of the key things which Lee mentioned is science-based targets. So obviously we're carbon neutral as of this year, but we still haven't hit our science-based targets yet, and we will continue to work towards those. Those are absolute targets which we can't offset for, and we have to make reductions in our scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions to hit that. And we're hoping to hit that in the next couple of years with our reduction strategy. As you can see from this graph, there's a kind of a focus on reduction, and one of the key things we've been looking at is removing scope 1 emissions. So that's dealing with transport for partner cars and wholly owned vehicles, but also looking at our offices, and we have a office fit out guide and purchase guide, and we're aiming to move away from properties which use fossil fuels, working with our landlords to try and set them on net zero carbon frameworks for their developments and buildings that we can move into, so we don't actually have any direct scope 1 emissions. If you go to the next slide, Johnny, one of the main focuses as well is scope 2 emissions, which we've gone through, which is electricity. And over the last few years, we've moved pretty much all of our offices onto green tariffs. But what we found is that not all green tariffs are equal. And this really varies around the globe. If you're in Australia or America and you're doing power purchase agreements, you can be pretty certain that you're getting renewable energy. Here in the UK, it's in a completely different story. If you go on to the next slide, there's a real problem in the UK with quality of green purchase requirements and green tariffs. So in the UK, you can buy power which has renewable certification, but they can be decoupled, and you can basically sell energy from a wind turbine, but it doesn't have a renewable certification. And conversely, you can take a renewable certification from a wind turbine or PV and couple it with coal or gas fired and sell it as renewable energy. And also, all the providers in the UK have to provide a minimum amount of renewable energy to meet the legal requirements, and they basically claim that they are providing this to their suppliers. And there are a couple of suppliers that say they can provide 100% renewable energy to their suppliers, even though they're only just meeting the minimum standards. So the quality of this is difficult to gauge. Luckily, the UK Green Building Council has just published their consultation on how to procure green energy, which is a really good document. And if you go to the next slide, it basically goes through the 3 main requirements you're looking for. So it's the source of the renewable energy, that you're taking the certification for that source, and it's not being attributed to something else. And the really important one is additionality, which is basically saying that if you are buying green energy, that provider is not just taking it from somewhere else and providing it to you. They're actually looking to build more capacity in their renewable portfolio. And move that forward. For an organisation like Cundall, who lease most of our buildings, this is really important, because we can't just go and put PV on our roof or invest in wind turbines because we don't own land or buildings ourselves. We have to procure our energy, and we've been moving slowly over to green tariffs over the last few years, and all of our offices are on them now. But we want to make sure that all of them are good quality before we start claiming zero carbon for those emissions, and we're just going through a process of finalising that and trying to improve the quality of that. So that should go out in the next couple of years. Then the next focus will be, as Lee indicated, we want to be a carbon positive organisation by 2025. And there's not really a clear definition of what carbon positive means. So you can see here that our emissions, basically, our offsets match our emissions for the next 4 or 5 years. And then come 2025, we are looking to probably offset double our emissions. There's a really good framework from the UK GBC again, which has just come out on this, if you go to the next slide, which basically looks at the problem of offsetting. And we've been doing a lot of research into this over the last couple of years, and we've come to very similar conclusions to the UK GBC. So in order to be certified with using the international standards like the Carbon Trust, you must use offsets which meet certain criteria, which at the moment are only really the international standard, the gold standard. So you can't really get any accredited UK schemes. So what the UK GBC are recommending, which we are looking at, is you do buy international recognized offsets, which are fairly cheap. They vary, as Madeline indicated, from a few dollars up to kind of $10 to $20. But on top of that, offsetting a similar amount in our local communities and countries, either through woodland procurement or through transitional funds. And transitional funds is the area that I'm most interested in. It's what we're looking at with a lot of our clients, which is basically reinvesting in the local community for their decarbonisation. So where we're doing developments, can we look at social value? Can we insulate social housing? Can we go into local schools and add insulation to give the same amount of offsetting? The UK GBC framework recommends that the price set for that carbon is in line with the UK government Green Book, which is around about £70 a tonne, which is a lot more expensive than the international standards. So we're basically paying twice and paying for more expensive ones. And this is what we'll be looking for. And again, it shows the importance of reduction. So if we reduce our overall footprint, the price goes down and sets an internal carbon budget for ourselves. There are other organisations and some of our clients working to internal carbon prices which are actually higher than this, coming up towards £100 a tonne. And again, we are reviewing all these things and are trying to set an internal carbon price at the moment. So you go to the next slide. So we've just been talking about our own journey and our own workplaces, but as we've talked a couple of times in the presentation, our biggest impact is on the projects we work on. And we've been working with the industry now for the last couple of years on defining net zero carbon in the built environment and really focusing on net zero carbon buildings, both at portfolio level and at individual asset level. We've put together these steps to net zero carbon, which look at operation energy, embodied carbon, whole life carbon, and reporting. And we're applying these to our new build projects and going into existing buildings. And existing buildings are the biggest challenge, really, because if you think about the target for 2050 in the UK, over 80% of the buildings which will be occupied in 2050 are already built. So they all need to be decarbonised. And we're going into a lot of assets at the moment and applying our 7 steps to decarbonising them. We've set ourselves an ambitious target that we will offer our clients a pathway to be net zero carbon on those projects by 2025, even if they implement it or not, and have nature-based solutions. So just to kind of summarise, in terms of our own journey, what were the key challenges? They're listed on the screen, and you really can't underestimate the challenge that is data collection, especially around the Scope 3 emissions. And Scope 3 emissions are a huge challenge because you have to understand which ones are material to you and which ones to focus on. As Lee indicated, there's 17 upstream and downstream emissions, and understanding which ones to focus on is important, and how to improve that data quality. As we indicated, we're still on the journey to improve ours, and procurement strategies are a great way to do so. One of the biggest challenges we face, and a lot of other consultants that we work with face, is leased asset, is the fact that we lease our offices. So we can't actually go and install PV on the roof or make significant changes to the buildings because we don't own them. So it's working with our landlords on their net zero carbon strategies, but also having implementation strategies for the things we can affect. And the biggest challenge is that creating the culture of change in the organisation. So it's no good having 4 or 5 people who buy into this and are passionate about it. We need to have a complete cultural change in the organisation and embed it across 1,000 people. So change management is a huge part of that, and rolling that out across the entire industry and organisation. So we've just summarised some of our top tips. I'm not going to read them all out, but it really is a huge process, and you really need to start by understanding your impacts. Materiality reviews are a good way to do so, and then looking at your footprint. Focus on the key areas. So our biggest area is obviously transport, so travel policies, procurement strategies, and looking at how we get people less travel. So video conferencing has been a big benefit to the organisation, and we invested in Zoom Teams before the COVID crisis, so we were actually quite geared up for when it actually hit, to work remotely and work from home. So there's huge things that we can do, and it's a continuously improving journey. Off the back of the experience we've had over the last few years, we've basically pulled together a list of services we're providing for clients now, and they cover both corporate level, so setting strategy, footprinting and roadmaps, down to portfolio level, where we're working with large portfolios on decarbonisation strategies and prioritisation strategies. And then for individual buildings, both passive house, whole life carbon, upfront carbon assessments and strategies for new buildings. So we're trying to have the biggest impact we can, and our projects is definitely where we're seeing real benefits and real gains at the moment. So we'll just finish up on the next slide, which is a nod to some of the presentations which are coming up in the future. So we've got a number of webinars if you want to sign up to. So looking at the clean air and how to improve clean air based on COVID's obviously seen an improvement, and it's how we maintain that. A presentation on the well building standard in hotels. We've obviously been a champion for the well building standard over the last few years, delivering 80% of the certified projects in the UK and 100% of the Shell and Core projects. And in response to the climate emergency, we've helped the GLA, Greater London Authority, set their standard for whole life carbon assessments for all referable schemes. That's just coming into effect. So we've got a presentation to take people through the requirements of that and how they can actually start to drive their embodied and whole life carbon down. So that's the end of the presentation. Do we have any questions?
Let me stop sharing the screen and then we can jump on some questions. We have quite a few questions, and there's some really good questions. We have about 12 minutes left, so I'd ask the panel to be succinct with their answers. So the first one, it seems obvious to us that neither landlord or occupier can achieve this alone, and it requires buy-in from both sides. How have you found that journey so far?
It's been a challenge. It's probably, like I said, it's been one of probably our biggest challenges because you can't affect it. It really requires that engagement, and we're working actually with quite a lot of major landlords. So I'm working with Legal and General, for example, and they have a huge occupier program. They've got their occupiers talking about net zero carbon, and they're trying to facilitate that. So it is definitely a mutual process. In our offices, the UK is starting to understand it and are starting to respond to it, but globally they're still a little way behind. So it's got a long way to go, and it's one of the biggest frustrations and challenges we face.
Okay. Under which scope would the embedded carbon of any new offices that Cundall require for themselves be measured?
It's an interesting one. So again, it depends on your organisation type. So embodied carbon of a leased asset isn't included. So if you're a consultant looking at your scope 3 emissions, embodied carbon generally doesn't factor. Your fit out will. But where I'm working with developers and contractors, their scope 3 emissions are huge, and the embodied carbon is the main driver of that. So we're working with them to reduce their strategies, but it doesn't actually appear on Cundall's reporting apart from for our office fit outs. And Johnny's leading our, Lee's leading our embodied carbon team structurally, and they're doing huge amounts of work on that.
Okay, thank you. What's the reason behind the increase in scope 1 in 2017-2018?
I pick on that, Simon? I think it's just largely that we're increasing the quality of our data capture. So up until that sort of timescale, we're reporting to bioregional, get to One Planet Living principles. There were some gaps in there on alignment with the greenhouse gas protocol. So we've incorporated fugitive emissions and company-owned vehicles within there. So that's really pushed up that spike. Makes our life harder to get it back down again. So we're trying to capture these things and keep ourselves moving forwards.
And I expect it'll probably go up again because there's more data coming out for refrigerant leakage. CIBSE have just published some data on that, and it's actually a lot larger issue than we actually originally thought. So yeah, you make reductions, but then more stuff comes in as you get better quality reporting, which makes it all much more challenging and more fun.
Good follow on from that around the challenge of reporting. A great question. Have you considered the impact on emissions of staff working from home at the moment? Presumably part of your scope 2 emissions.
not scope 2, it'd be scope 3. But yeah, there's been a few conferences on that recently, because obviously our commuting's gone significantly down on business travel. And people are starting to ask about how we account for staff working from home. And it's obviously very difficult, because do you take their entire electricity and gas bill and put it in your scope 3, or how do you work out the uplift? Do you look at before and after data? So yes, we are looking at it, but we haven't come up with a solution. I don't think anyone fully has. And we will hopefully start to attribute that going forward, especially as we move to more agile working in the future.
Yeah, I think we could probably have a full conference and discussion on the future of work and its impact on sustainability, and we probably will sometime next year. As a multinational company, other than the changes this year from COVID-19 and reduced travel, how far in percentage terms has the team got at changing the culture of international business flights impact, e.g. fare ticket, flight frequency? Do you use incentive to lead the cultural change? Maybe that would be one for Thomas as a throw you one to answer, Thomas. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, historically, we've not been a business who want to go on lots of flights for the sake of going on flights. There is a real benefit, though, to physically being present in lots of our global offices to collaborate and join together and pull together as a business. Obviously, this year, COVID has shown all businesses how you can transition and convert into a different business model where you don't get on planes to go and visit and travel everywhere. So it's something that we have by necessity been running since we became an international business in 2002, is the ability to communicate without traveling. And I think the current work and practice, and even when we return to normal after coronavirus, will impact on the emissions we generate by travel in the future. It'll certainly be reduced.
Thinking of procurement and supply chain, how do you make a commitment to use local supply chain and smaller businesses when your disclosure and procurement requirements are so tough? Does this drive you towards other large companies?
Yeah, this is a major problem. Our procurement strategy we're still driving through at the moment, and it's evolving piece. And again, what I've done with clients around supply chain chart is set a timescale. So it's not making it mandatory requirement to provide that information to start. So it's given them a number of years in order to phase that information in for the smaller businesses. So setting a trajectory of what information we want and when we want it. But again, it does lead to going to organisations that can provide that. It's the same in the construction industry. So where we're looking at embodied carbon so much at the moment, it's driving us towards developed nations. So obviously developed nations have stricter decarbonisation and reporting. So things like steel and materials generally are moving towards more European selection and away from other countries, which could cause social issues. So again, it's why we try and use the UN sustainability goals to define our strategy. So we're not just looking at carbon. Local community is just as important. We need to override some of the carbon savings to look at the other sustainability criteria and agenda.
Have you considered employee commuting as part of Scope 3? Who wants to answer that?
We do, yeah, we do an annual employee commuting survey, so we're capturing that data in there, and so we're kind of reviewing and expanding our Scope 3 on a regular basis. At the moment, we're focused on business travel as our largest area, and really the largest, it's focused on areas as well we feel we've got a significant impact. So we try and place our offices in places that support staff using sustainable modes of transport to get staff making the right decisions.
Okay, and there was a second part to that. Also, what percent targets have you set for your science-based targets? That's a good question.
Science is roughly 60%. It's slightly different. I think, don't quote me on this, it's on our website. I think it's about 57% for Scope 1 and 2 and 63% for Scope 3. It's on the website. We've got the full disclosure reports, which Madeline went through, with both in our OPR reporting and our carbon trust reporting.
Scope, sorry.
There's also our sustainability report on the website. If anyone wants to look into the OPL tracking, how we're tracking along with the other impacts.
Scope 3 is finally on the agenda of the NHS. How are you measuring this, and are you linking this with supply chains procurement practices? I guess we've kind of covered that slightly.
Just on the NHS is probably one of the hardest. So we're working with quite a few NHS trusts at the moment, and it's a real challenge because data is really difficult to achieve, especially for Scope 3, because there are so many Scope 3s for NHS, but also the decarbonisation strategy for sitting assets and the fact they've got to carry on being operational. It's probably one of the biggest challenges. So it's going to be an interesting field going forward. But Scope 3, yeah, like you say, it's a nightmare to capture for organisations as big as the NHS. Like, we're a consultancy so we really just have 20 offices and 1,000 people. It's fairly easy to get our data, but we've still struggled over the last 8 or 9 years. Where I'm working with developers, NHS trusts and bigger organisations, data collection and management is really vital. And full-time data systems and analytical systems to review that data is really important.
We did a panel discussion, if those that are interested missed it, which is also on our YouTube channel around this, and the challenge of sort of risk-averse thinking versus climate change was a really interesting discussion. So I definitely recommend going and having a look at that, and we're looking to do a follow-up to that as well. Really interesting question. Business success traditionally measured by profitability. Is there a change on success measured by carbon neutral by stakeholders and the city? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I think there is in terms of investment, because and Simon will probably talk to this better than I will, but certainly when we're talking to those that will invest in property in the future, right from the Bank of England down to, and well, up, I guess, to global funds and to investors, they're looking at green and brown investment as to where do you put your money, where you get an ethical return and a climate positive return, rather than just where you can make the best bottom line return. That's definitely, live in the market and very strong in the market at the moment.
Yeah, over the last 6 months, the movement in the investment market has been astronomical. They've been the key drivers for me, like the introduction for the Task Force on Financial Disclosure by the Bank of England and Mark Carney, which is now chaired by Bloomberg, is just driving green investment to another level. And developers who would never speak to me before are now phoning me up saying they need ESG strategies in order to secure funding. So it is really changing very fast, and the rate of change is astronomical, which is really positive. And COVID hasn't slowed it down. If anything, it's accelerated it, which is great.
I think this has to be the last question, but probably a good one to finish on, and again, probably one that leads into a whole nother discussion. What do you see as the future skills needs in this area, particularly higher skills? Are they bespoke or need to be embedded in existing degrees? Any insights you can share?
It's a real mix. We've struggled with this as well, because we were traditionally engineering based, and we're getting more and more people with different skill sets join the business as we work more with organizational sustainability strategies. So we're doing more and more work with corporations outside of the built environment, and we realize that there are different languages and different skill sets. The key is data understanding, data analytics, but also the communication piece, because again, the biggest challenge, as I indicated, is cultural change and buy-in, and that drives through the entire organization. So communication skills are really vital on how we take this forward and communicate it effectively. You've seen the construction industry come together a lot closer and drive this forward in the property sector, and that's all been through the younger generation, who are much more collaborative and less willing to be protective over the information and sharing information. So it is new skill sets, but we are training up our people to do so, and it's going to be very interesting. But the key thing is this transparency, because there is a lot of because it is such an evolving and technical area, there is opportunity for greenwash and false claims. So transparency, publicizing data and methodology is really important, so we can see what everyone's doing and hold everyone to account and learn from the best practice examples. At the moment, there's so many good roadmaps coming out from the big developers and investment funds. We're learning a lot from them, and the more people share, the faster we'll move, and it's the only way we've really got a hope of meeting the 1.5 degree targets.
Yeah, we have a lot more questions that have come in, and I suggest that if people have things they want to speak to the panel about, or kind of anyone at Cundall, then please come forward and ask. The recording of this session will be, as I say, put on our YouTube channel and shared with everybody. As Simon said, there are a number of other webinars coming up. All of the other webinars that we've been running recently over the last couple of years are also on the YouTube channel, so they go into a lot more depth in some of these areas. And if there are particular things you want us to talk about at future webinars, please tell us, and we'll try and put them together, or we'll come in and speak to you specifically. But yeah, just leave it to say thank you very much to the panel for a really interesting presentation, and thank you all for dialing in from across the world. There'll be many more like this to come, so please look out for them in future. And yeah, have a great rest of the day. Thank you all.
Thank you for participating all.